Can you beat Dark Souls 2 using only miracles? Yes. The answer is yes. Look, I'm not one of those crappy clickbait channels that bombards you with will he, won't he scenarios. And anyway, you can beat Dark Souls 2 using a bloody ladle if you want, so of course it's possible. No doubt there's someone somewhere who's beaten it on NG +7 at soul level 1, fists only with no running or rolling, blindfolded. But that person isn't me. I'd love it if you hung around anyway to watch the journey though. There might even be pie at the end. Let's get the basics out of the way first. The reason I chose Dark Souls 2 for this run is simple. It's the only game of the trilogy where I can obtain some miracles that actually do damage without having to kill any tutorial bosses using a different type of weapon or spell. Now, if bosses decide to kill themselves or walk into stray ballista bolts, well, I guess you could just call that a miracle too. I fired up the game, ran to the creepy old ladies who insulted my face, gave myself a suitably humorous name because I am a comedy genius, made myself unbelievably beautiful, chose a bonfire ascetic as my gift because I had a devilish plan, and picked cleric as my starter class. Duh. No weapons allowed in this run, so I fisted an innocent cart to death and grabbed a few starter items from things betwixt, including most importantly the 2 amber herbs. Took an early bath because I forgot what the jump input for this game was, and headed to Majula to say, "Ooh, it's so pretty." After collecting all the items in the area, making especially sure to get the Estus shard and the Titanite shard, and joining Misery McDepression's Covenant to get a ring that gave me, I don't know, like 2 extra HP or something, I spoke to the Bear Seek Lest lady and made my way straight to Hyde's Tower of Flame. I'd love to show you how I fought all the enemies in this area, but since I didn't have any way of dealing damage yet, that didn't happen. So I ran straight for the fog gate, counted to 6 like a big boy, and ran forwards, which scared a fat man so much that he hurled himself to his watery demise rather than face me. Upstairs, the totally trustworthy lady sold me Lightning Spear, my first offensive miracle. I walked back to Firelink Part 2, popped all the souls I'd obtained, and boosted my faith as high as I could. Then, in a decision that made perfect mathematical sense at the time, but which would cause me a great deal of pain later, I went back to Hyde's, burnt a bonfire ascetic, and repeated the whole shebang for even more souls to faith myself up with. As I had some leftover pocket change, I went to find Lycia in her new spot and opened up the path to Huntsman's Copse, and she was so impressed by my newfound faith that she gave me all her clothes. So, that was nice. Most importantly, her hood gave me 1 extra cast of Lightning Spear, which would make all the difference early on. Now I had my new fancy pants on, it was time to visit the Forest of the Fallen Giants, where I somehow managed to avoid all the ganks, punched a door a couple of times in anger, and spectacularly failed to kill a crystal lizard before dying to a pair of broken knees. After 2 more fails at the lizard, I finally downed the mighty beast, bought the key and a couple of firebombs from token creepy merchant lady, grabbed another Estus shard before noping out as the pursuer swooped in, swept the area for other items, and opened up the shortcut to the last giant. I returned to Majula to open up the blacksmith. Well, I opened up his shack, I didn't open him up, that would just be weird. And upgraded my cleric's chime before going back to the forest to take on my first real boss, old Arseface himself, to test my damage. Sadly, it wasn't nearly high enough yet to take him out with the 8 casts of Lightning Spear I would be able to squeeze out of the miracle plus the 2 amber herbs I owned, so it was time for a small rethink. I decided that a brief vacation to Novelty Pirate Theme Park would probably do the trick, where I grabbed a few consumable souls and returned to Melentia to buy up her stock of amber herbs, which would up my total available spear cast for the boss fight to 14. On my way back to the last giant, I was visited by a hostile invader who had the number 69 in their username. Get it? It's funny because that's the sex number. So I graciously died, returned to the fog gate, and played Zeus with the boss until he decided to fuck off back to the void. GG me. After even more faith levelling, it was pursuer time, so I ran in, stood by the barrel, said peace out dude, and let the ballista mysteriously turn the pursuer into the pursued.
Wasn't me.
Sadly, FromSoft's underlings said,
Not today.
so I had to finish things off the old-fashioned way. I hope I never see that dude again. After a brief stop-off at the Lost Bastille to grab the Dull Ember and open up Macduff's, it was time for more piratey goodness. And by piratey goodness, I actually mean sprinting through the entire area with a torch, stopping only to grab my second damage miracle, Emit Force, ringing the Bell of Awakening. Oh, wait. I'm picking up the goodies in this room, including the cinnamon stick, most importantly. I decided that the sentry could wait for now, so instead, I returned to the Majula outskirts to unpetrify Rosabeth, who very rudely coughed all over me, before dashing through the shaded woods to get the weed ring and onwards into the shaded ruins. Plenty of good items around here, so I hoovered them up faster than Simon Cowell hoovers up a line of coke before I made several bad decisions in a row. The first was speaking to Old Man Goth without actually killing him. You see, Grandal drops the dragon chime when killed, which is easily the best chime in the game for lightning casts. Unfortunately, I forgot that if you speak to him, he subsequently disappears from this area, so rip good chime for me until later. Sad face emoji. The second bad decision was unpetrifying the lion dude. I did this because I wanted to progress Ornifex's quest. However, I didn't factor in the fact that my miracles were about as effective as tickling him with a feather. Oops. Guess we're coming back later then. Finally, for the icing on the cherry on the icing, I wasted some twinkling titanite on upgrading a chime I would go on to never use. All in all, a day well spent. Since my trip to the woods was an even bigger failure than my actual real life, I headed back to the wharf to take out my pent-up aggression on the four-armed lizard boy by repeatedly electrocuting him until he shuffled off this mortal coil, before returning to the Lost Bastille, opening up the remaining areas and grabbing all the goodies. I progressed onwards to Sinner's Rise, where I practiced my high diving skills off the elevator, before picking up a ring that increases spell uses but lowers HP. I very quickly decided that since my build was pretty glass cannon at the moment to begin with, I preferred the security blanket of full HP over the ring's effects, so that was another glorious waste of time. By now, I was stalling for time. You see, my options were fight the Lost Sinner, fight the Skeleton Lords, fight Cut Price Quailag, or grind 13,000 souls to buy the cat ring and drop down the pit. None of the boss fights felt like a fun choice at this stage with my limited damage options, particularly the Skeleton Lords, who would require plenty of spellcasts to clear all the adds in the fight. I decided to go and get Huntsman's Copse opened up anyway, while I pondered my predicament, where I shouted Rowena off a cliff like it's Skyrim all over again, got invaded by Forlorn, which ended as predictably as you'd expect, and generally died a lot as I was trying to conserve spell uses by running past enemies. Pro tip, this is a bad idea in DS2. Undeterred by my earlier attempts, I returned to the Shaded Ruins to try and force push the Lion Man off an edge. In doing so, I accidentally punched him, and he was so disgusted by my blatant disregard for my own challenge rules I'd set myself that he joined me in ritual suicide. Look, I'll take whatever luck I can get, don't judge me. With the Fang key in hand, I was able to open the door and, Jesus love, put some clothes on. None of this particularly helped me with the conundrum of beating the next bosses, so instead I went back to Hyde's and farmed 13,000 echoes from the knights there, returned to Majula and bought the cat ring from Shalquar while she sexually harassed me, made my way down the pit, sprinted through the gutter because fuck that place, and opened up Black Gulch. I would still need far more spellcast to beat the Rotten than I had available at this time though, so I devised a different plan. Firstly, I unpetrified Strayed with the extra branches I'd picked up on my travels. He might be a rude bastard, but he also sells 3 Rouge Waters, which I could use to replenish my spellcasts. Next, I bought the travelling merchant's hat from Malentia and farmed a set of prisoner's tatters from the hollows in the copse. Both these items increased drop rates from enemies, so I equipped them and went back to the Bastille to farm the jailers for Twilight Herbs, another consumable that replenishes spellcasts. With 4 Rouge Waters, 6 Twilight Herbs, 1 Wilted Dusk Herb and 2 Offensive Miracles in my collection, I felt brave and powerful enough to take on the Rotten now. Not so brave and powerful that I didn't back my save up just in case though. As far as Dark Souls 2 bosses go, the Rotten is about as intimidating as a slightly annoyed radish. And, suspect grab hitboxes aside, I melted through him with ease to unlock my first primal bonfire. I celebrated my success by levelling up some more and gesturing angrily at the Emerald Herald to assert dominance, before returning to the Gulch to claim my real prize, the Forgotten Key. The 2 giants provided no real challenge since I could just blast them from distance, and armed with the key, I opened up Grandal's hidey hole and lasered him to death to finally get my hands on the Dragon Chime, as well as dropping back down the pit to grab a much needed upgrade to my spells, Great Lightning Spear. I was finally starting to feel like the powerful badass I knew I could become. Sadly, overconfidence breeds arrogance, so I decided I would return to Hyde's to clear a path to the Phone Steam fight. My reasoning being that beating this boss would unlock Blue Sentinel Targrey, a very useful merchant for my build as he sells several good items including the Heavenly Thunder Miracle, a second copy of Emit Force, and bolt stones I could use to lightning infuse my Dragon Chime. Remember how I used a bonfire ascetic on this area earlier on? Yeah, so as it turns out that was a really bad idea. If New Game is a shit sandwich, then New Game Plus is a whole hamper of shit sandwiches with extra turd dip on the side. I didn't want to waste any of my precious spell replenishment consumables, so I experimented with seeing whether I could get the dragon to kill all the other ads in the area. Unfortunately, the dragon was more interested in helping me to beat all known flight speed records. Perfect execution. Suitably humbled, I admitted defeat and slunk back to the copse with my tail between my legs to try my luck with the Skeleton Lords. Although I now had 1 extra spell, I also only had 2 spell replenishing consumables left, and I knew this would be a very close fight, so I save scummed anyway to be on the safe side. This would prove to be a very wise decision. Luckily, my second attempt was far more successful. The Lords themselves could be taken down pretty quickly with my more powerful miracles. Lightning Spear and Emit Force were plenty strong enough to clear out the ads, as long as I made sure to hit them when they were bunched together for extra splash damage. With victory in the bag, I pushed onwards through Harvest Valley, stopping to admire Stone Trader Cloanne's fine assortment of wares and killing everything in sight, before reaching the Altar of the Sun. I joined the Covenant, and in return received another tick on my Miracle Bingo card in the form of the Sun Seal Ring, which increases the strength of all offensive miracles by 5%. Very nice indeed.
More power. I need even more power.
At this stage, my faith was high enough for further increases to be of little difference to me, so I decided I would be better served by boosting attunement for more spellcasts and reinforcing my Dragon Chime. If only there was a way to get souls and Twinkling Titanite all at once. Oh, hey my guy. Oh, hi my guy. Oh, it's you again. Pursuer must be sick of the sight of me by now. With my bounty in hand, I returned to Majula to reinforce the chime and spend my souls on more attunement, before heading to the Shaded Ruins for my blind date with Nazca. Much like the average Tinder experience, her profile picture proved to be deceptive, so I swiped left and shocked her ugly booty into oblivion. Easy clap. After a brief stop to grab more twinkling tits from the doors of Pharos, I bullied Jabba the Hutt until he gave me his lunch money, which I promptly spent on raising my intelligence up to 8 so that Magic Gramps would finally talk to me and sell me some more spell replenishing consumables. Back to Earthen Peak, where I painstakingly pushed through, stopping off to buy an overpriced ladder from a pregnant man in exchange for even more twinklings, and picking up a very welcome second copy of Lightning Spear before blasting past a screaming snake lady with relative ease. Don't lose your head, love. One geographically impossible elevator ride later, and I found myself deep in the delights of the Iron Keep, where Armourer Dennis met with an unfortunate lava bath before I slowly and deliberately cleared out the area using consumables when needed to top up my spells. I decided against the Smelter Demon fight because I didn't want to waste miracles reaching the boss, and trying to sprint through to the fog is guaranteed death. So instead, I progressed all the way onwards towards the Old Iron King, making sure I grabbed the Gold Serpent Ring en route. Old Iron King proved to be a total pushover. The edge of his arena though? Not so much. After toweling myself down, I stepped back in the ring for round 2 and lightning bolted the big old king to an early grave, before firing up my second primal bonfire and returning to Brightstone, because imagine doing things in a sensible order. Before I moved on to do anything else, I needed to finally face up to a task I'd been avoiding like a phone call from an unknown number. You see, the most powerful lightning miracle in the game is actually locked behind the Heirs of the Sun Covenant. Hand in 30 sunlight medals and it's yours. I figured that for endgame this would be pretty damn essential, so I got the soapstone from Pate, as well as much gear to increase item drop rates as I had available, and set about to doing as much farming and sunbrowing as I could handle. Which wasn't very much. 30 medals take a while to collect, so from here on in just assume that I kept coming back to this task in between the other events I'm about to describe. Back to our regularly scheduled programming, where Prowling Magus and Congregation proved to be about as interesting as you'd expect a room full of shitty ads to be. Beating them does, however, open up the path to Cromwell the Pardoner, who silently judged me as I bought a second copy of Emit Force and a new miracle, Heavenly Thunder. The latter is not particularly great, but extra spells are extra spells. Brightstone Cove itself was as spidery as always, so all hail the mighty torch, repeller of arachnids and bringer of light. Big Mommy Spider welcomed me into her lair, but I didn't trust the two-faced bitch, so I electrocuted her until she stopped twitching to add another primal bonfire to my collection. With only one remaining, I returned to Sinner's Rise, where I'd saved the easiest until last. The Lost Sinner might seem like an intimidating prospect earlier on in the game, but by now she was as threatening as British wildlife, and my great lightning spears ripped through her like scissors gliding through wrapping paper. Finally, I could light the last primal bonfire and... Oh, fuck off, Aldia. I'm just trying to play the game, I couldn't care less about your carefully crafted lore. I'm sure it was interesting though, something about a king who turned himself into a pickle, I think. With all the great souls embraced, it was time to push onward to Dranglake Castle. The Emerald Herald was there to welcome me, which made me wonder why she couldn't have just taken me there in the first place. I fed souls to some stone giants to open a door, which seems like an impractical mechanism to implement. Like, do you have to kill someone every time you come back from the shops? I spoke to an invisible man who sold me some more valuable consumables, made sure to grab the frozen flower, met Nishandra, she seems nice, and embarrassed myself harder than I've ever embarrassed myself before by actually dying to Dollar Store Keenan and Kel. Lightning doesn't strike twice, unless it's my lightning hitting Dragon Rider in his stupid fat face. So I carried onwards and upwards, said hi to the castle Gimp, killed the pretty booby ladies for another Estus shard, and went to take on the Looking Glass Knight. He might have a shiny shield that my spells bounce off, but that was easily countered with my pro strat of just aiming for the other side of him. And this fight turned out to be incredibly straightforward in the end, even when he did try and summon his little powers to help him out. I celebrated my victory and took the elevator down to, yes, you know, that place. Undeterred by my earlier failures, I figured it was time to revisit hides. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which is why I still tried to just run through a few times. I can confirm it did not go well. So I bit the bullet, slowly picked off every enemy, nuked the dragon, nuke Phonestein even harder, and spoke to Blue Sentinel Targrey to buy more copies of Emit Force and Heavenly Thunder, as well as a much needed Bolt Stone to infuse my Dragon Chime with. Next, I decided to put off the Shrine of Infinite Magic spam even longer by heading into the first DLC to play Indiana Jones. As it turns out, the Shrine would have been an infinitely less frustrating choice, as managing to get through Shulva by running past the enemies on a glass cannon build is an enormous kick in the dick, especially this room. Fuck this room. Many suicide runs later, I managed to get the chest open and also grab the Sanctum key, which I used to unlock a room full of lovely ladies where I found the item I'd come here for. The Lightning Clutch Ring. Okay, fuck this place, good DLC my ass. I couldn't put off the inevitable any longer, so I returned to the Shrine of Amana to take my punishment like a good boy. As it turns out, hitting enemies stood waist deep in water with lightning is actually surprisingly effective. Who knew water and electricity was such a powerful combo? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I made it through the entire area completely death-free, which makes a pleasant change, and Kermit the Frog was about as threatening as always if you feel threatened by a giant foreskin flapping around in the bath. As a bonus, lots of enemies in this area also dropped Twinkling Titanite, which was pretty useful for upgrading my chime. Undead Crypt next, and boy do I hate this area. Aldia made another unwelcome appearance, so I promptly ignored everything he said and attempted to make my way through the crypt with the minimum of fuss. Easier said than done, especially since using Emit Force to break the stones could easily clip one of the bells by mistake. I opened up the shortcut, ran past everything in the main corridor, and faced up to Bellstat. Get it? 'Cause his weapon's a big bell? My talent is wasted on you lot, I swear. This is one of my favourite fights from the main game. No gimmicks, just me slinging lightning bolts at a big angry dude in armour. I rolled and pew-pewed until he was no more, met Pickle Rick, grabbed the King's Ring, and said hi to the Emerald Herald, who once again had somehow managed to bypass all the enemies. Tell me your secret, please. Now I had the King's Ring, it was time to progress to the endgame. Aldia's Keep first, which is an interesting area lore-wise if you don't just run straight through past every enemy like I did. Look, go watch Farty if you're into that stuff. Guardian Dragon tried to put up a good fight. No, he didn't. He just flapped around in the air for half the battle like a fly trying to find an open window, so I swatted him with a few lightning spears and took the elevator up to the Dragon Eyrie, where I met the Herald again, who rewarded me for all my hard work so far by giving me... a feather? Are you shitting me, love? I had no real reason to clear the Eyrie, so I took the express line straight out of there and crossed Motion Sickness Bridge to the Dragon Shrine. Aldia showed up again, but I was too busy laughing at how teeny tiny he was to actually listen to anything he said. I took on the big knights in an honourable set of duels, if by honourable you mean standing well outside their range and shooting them until they died, looted the area for some goodies, including the very useful third dragon ring, and spoke to the ancient dragon to obtain the Ashen Mist Heart. Don't you worry, lad, I'll be back. Armed with the King's Ring and the Ashen Mist Heart, it was time to collect some more giant souls from the memories. I didn't waste any time clearing the areas, just sprinted through and grabbed what I needed, as well as taking down the Giant Lord, a boss that's about as scary as a small child saying boo. The same cannot be said about the Ancient Dragon, however. This fight is annoying at the best of times with his questionable foot stomp hitboxes and enormous fire breath AoE. I decided the best strat would be to stay in front of him at distance to bait out his forward fire breath, dodge to the side of it, and let rip a few bolts. As soon as he started to raise up in the air, I ran as far away as possible to avoid the AoE, and then repositioned myself in front of him again to repeat the process. After a couple of failed attempts that I can mainly put down to my complete lack of patience, I downed him, and with 5 giant souls firmly pocketed, I could finish this. Remember how I mentioned before that I had been farming sunlight medals? Well, many sets of Falconer's armour later, I finally had enough to obtain the Big Daddy spell, Sunlight Spear. No idea which idiot at FromSoft decided I would have to hand in all my medals individually, but 4 minutes later I had a brand new shiny toy to play with, and a giant pickle man to slice up. Big Daddy Vendrick had other ideas, however, and caught me off guard a couple of times with his ridiculously long sword. You know what they say about guys with big swords though? That they're weak to you hugging the back of their left leg. One dead Vendrick later, and it was off to the Throne of Want to take on the final trilogy of bosses. First up, it was Watcher and Defender, the worst duo since the Twin Dragon Riders actually, whose puny health bars were no real match for me summoning the powers of the heavens. Nashandra waltzed in next, doing the worst impression of a big titty goth girlfriend ever, and got summarily dismissed in an equally casual fashion. As always, the most annoying boss of the three proved to be Aldia, mainly because you spend over half the fight waiting for him to stop spamming his branch attacks and fireballs to be able to exploit the tiny windows when he's actually vulnerable. I used a mix of Heavenly Thunder, which can be quite effective on large bosses, and my variety of lightning and sunlight spears to take him down. He gave me his usual endgame speech despite already being dead. I commanded the giants to bow down before my miracle mastery, and took my rightful place on the throne to become another cog in the flame-linking machine. I look damn good doing it though. What do you mean we're not finished? Oh, yeah, that. Fine. I will say, as I'd already decided this wasn't going to be an all bosses run. Rip Grandal. The optional DLC bosses can go take a big running jump at a flying fuck. Why? Because Horsefuck Valley, that's why. First stop, back to Shulva. Thankfully, as I'd already cleared a large portion of this earlier, it was a straight run through to lower the bridge and open up the path to Ilana, interrupted only by Jester Thomas trying to impress me with a fireworks show and kindly providing me with a heal to cheese him with. If most things up to this point were fairly straightforward, this is where shit began to get really real, as you'd expect. Trying to negotiate Ilana, her Skelly Bros, and Big Bad Velstadt with the slow casting of miracles is as much of a pain as it sounds. And after a few frustrating attempts that ended in death, I decided I needed to be way more prepared for this. First on the agenda was collecting all the Estus shards and Sublime Bone Dust that I had ignored on my playthrough so far, so I did a quick whistle-stop tour of Drang Lake to scoop them all up. This included spending an embarrassingly long time running around the gutter trying to find the shard I'd missed there, only to then remember that I didn't even need it, as the game gives you one shard more than you actually need. However, it did also give me an opportunity to also grab the Aurus armour, so my fashion souls would be on point if nothing else. Next up, I paid Ornifex a visit in Brightstone Cove to buy up her supply of Amber and Twilight herbs, and finally, I grabbed a Bright Bug from Aldia's Keep, 2 more from the delightful Cave of the Dead, and bought some more from Melentia. Fully kitted out now, I was ready for anything Ilana could throw at me, which mainly consisted of dark orbs, exploding fireballs, and an assortment of skeletons. With the Foul Witch downed, I took a brief detour to visit John Cena and buy some wilted dusk herbs with my well-earned winnings, before facing off against the most annoying dragon fight in the whole series. Seriously, why do people like this boss? A couple of deaths to his perfectly accurate hitboxes later, and Sin exploded into a flash of light, I grabbed my first crown as a reward for my efforts, and returned to Majula to Netflix and chill with the Herald. Time to sweep through Broom Tower next. Get it? Sweep? Broom? So, after making a run for the key, it was off to the delights of exploding barrel men, resuscitating archers, electric witches, chicken drumstick sellers, and more ganks than a Dark Souls 3 PvP session. This room in particular proved to be a massive ball ache, so I used alluring skulls to draw the grunts towards the trapdoor and pick them off one by one, before cheesing, tactically removing the big guy from the same spot and finishing off the remainder by blowing up Barrel Boy. I proceeded down to the foyer, carefully picked my way through even more enemies, dispatched Quicksword Rachel, picked up the Iron Scepter, ran away from all of the Crawley suicide bombers, and lit up the foyer like a Christmas tree. After making a dash for the tower key, it was down, down, down towards the bottom. My first attempt at just running past everything until I reached the bottom floor went about as badly as you'd expect, because even though I've played this game many times, I still don't ever learn. Attempt number 2 saw me actually take my time and pick off all the enemies one by one, and finally I reached the bonfire outside the Fume Knights arena. Raim himself proved to be the most enjoyable fight of the run. Despite a couple of failed tries while working out which attack windows were big enough for me to actually have time to cast my spears at him, this turned out to be a very fair dance with a fun level of challenge, without me ever feeling too rushed. As long as my dodging remained on point, as well as not being too frustrating due to its extremely simple boss run, unlike someone else I could mention. And after a few minutes of avoiding his combos and retaliating, I felled the mighty knight and claimed my prize. The second DLC crown. Very stylish, thanks. I quickly unlocked the path to Sorolon's bonfire, but decided I would leave him until the very end, where he would make a fine prize to celebrate me completing my run. Also, I really couldn't be bothered with his boss run right now. Sue me.
Hello there.
After a quick level up, I headed to the Shrine of Winter to be transported to Frozen Ilium Lois for the final stage of my journey. Alsana tried to warn me away. I didn't listen as usual, worked my way past the hordes of spell slingers and angry ice creams, stopped off to pick up one final offensive miracle, Splintering Lightning Spear. This wouldn't prove to be very useful at this stage, but it's nice to complete the Miracles bingo card. And finally, I grabbed the Eye of the Priestess. Who just leaves their eye lying around anyway, so careless. Kitty time now, and I had totally run out of cat treats, so Ava hissed at me and scratched a lot when I tried to pet her with my electric bolts. Bad kitty. Down kitty. Alsana told me about the 3 knights I needed to find in order to help me in the final battle and unfroze all the hidden paths, so I set out on 3 suicide runs to gather up the knights. Like this guy. And this guy. Oh, and this guy as well. See you soon, fellas. I knew that the final face-off against the Burnt Ivory King would be difficult, mainly because surviving the preceding gangbang without blowing my miraculous load prematurely would take some doing. I therefore came up with a cunning plan. I returned to the Undead Crypt to grab the Crushed Eye Orb and headed off to find Lycia in Majula. After buying up the rest of her available spells, including more lightning spears, I thanked her kindly by invading her world and brutally slaughtering her in order to obtain the Soothing Sunlight miracle. My plan was to let the Lois Knights do all the heavy lifting in the first phase of the fight, while I cast Soothing Sunlight to keep them healed up. As it turns out, this was an awful plan. The problem was that most of the child Lois Knights harassed me harder than hornets at a picnic, and finding the time to actually cast Soothing Sunlight without getting mercilessly hacked to death proved to be impossible. It was time for a new plan, and this time I would not fail. I went back to Dranglake Castle and turned Horsey Boy into glue in order to get Gower's Ring of Protection. My idea this time was to simply equip the ring and turn my back on the knights, relying on the ring to protect me and allow me time to cast the healing miracle. Remember when I said this time I would not fail? It was only a few sentences ago, keep up. Well, I was wrong. This was also a shitty plan, so I decided to return to basics. Fuck trying to heal the knights, I would simply try and kite some of the charred knights around, picking them off when I got an opportunity and buying my new friends enough time to clean up the rest of the pack. In a surprising plot twist, this actually worked well enough for me to keep one of the knights alive by the time Anakin Skywalker himself put in his grandiose appearance. About bloody time too. Now that the shitty part of the fight was over, it was time to have some fun, and after some dodging and shooting, it was finally time to claim the last DLC crown. Don't worry, I hadn't forgotten about Mr. Shiny Floors himself. I knew that, due to his speed, Sir Alon would be a particularly tricky opponent in this challenge, as I would have to time my casting windows perfectly. So to ease my pain, I took a little time to despawn all the first floor knights in order to make the boss run a little easier. Okay, time for a dramatic musical montage to finish up. Take it away, lads. With all bosses on my list finally dead, I headed to the Shrine of Amana, gathered up the King's crown, hopped into the old man's memories, watched the cutscene of him pimping my crown, and I had finally beaten Dark Souls 2 with miracles only. Not very impressive, I know, but I did promise you all pie if you stuck around until the end, so here you go. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more content, and I will catch you all again soon. Peace.